everyone, and welcome to Let's Talk About Brand. I, of course, am your host, Christine Gritman. I am coming at you every single week, interviewing smart guest experts about specific elements of branding, especially personal branding. If you are listening to us on the Adweek Podcast Network, please go ahead and subscribe on your podcast player of choice. And if you love the show, which I'm sure you will, be sure to leave a review. If you're joining us on the YouTube video podcast, welcome to you as well. And I also encourage you to subscribe. I've got the podcast launching every Monday. I've got the video podcast on YouTube on Fridays. And then in between, on Tuesdays, I host the Chat About Brand Twitter chat on Twitter, always about the same topic as that week's guest interview. And this week's guest interview is something that I absolutely need to learn from. I'm going to be rewatching and re-listening to this one for a while because I'm a little, you talk about type A, type B. I'm firm B. It may not come across, but I'm so loosey-goosey with all of this. I throw stuff at the wall and see what sticks to perhaps a greater degree than I ought. And so I'm so excited to learn from today's fabulous guest. Shelley Röstlund is a systems-led branding strategist. And we're going to talk about what that means, what her branding system is, and why it still allows for a lot of personalization, creativity, flexibility, all that good stuff that goes into a good brand. All right, so without any further ado, we're going to bring her on. Hello, welcome, Shelley.
Hello, hello.
Hello. So one of the cool things we were talking about in our pre-chat is you mentioned, what was it? The not systems mindset, systems process.
Systems thinking.
Systems thinking. Thank you. Yes. So if you could just define that for us really quickly, I think that would be a helpful framework to start.
Yeah, really good. And obviously, I'm not the inventor either. So if you ever wanted to read up on this as well, there's actually an environmental scientist called Donella Meadows that published a really brilliant primer on systems thinking, and it's over 20 years old. But basically what systems thinking gives you is this framework to kind of understand how bigger processes work, if you like, or even society or the economy, right? So, and from her standpoint, she was thinking about the environment. But basically with systems-led thinking, the whole premise is that a system exists if there's these four elements to it, right? So the first thing is that the system actually has a purpose, number one. Number two, that there are actually elements within the system. So that's number two. Number three is that there are actually interrelationships in between all of those elements. And then the fourth aspect is that there are inflows and outflows. So basically it means whatever, are there things coming into the system and there are things coming out to the system. So when I kind of read that primer, I was like, oh gosh, this could really be applied to branding. So that's how I kind of started bringing in the systems bit. And I've always been a systems girl. I'm a documenter. I know you throw things at walls, but I'm a real documenter, and I really like to not even just document my thoughts, but I am quite I lean a lot towards trying to look at that bigger picture and how sometimes there's unseen dots that are connected. So for me, like when I read this element about systems-led thinking, I was like, gosh, yes, let's apply that to branding.
Now, were you already in branding, or were you already in systems and decided to apply this to branding?
Well, gosh, that's like a double-edged sword reply for that one, because systems had always kind of been, I think I was born as a system. I'm not sure. But I came from a franchising background, right? So I didn't come to digital marketing and social media, content marketing and things from a conventional route by any means, right? So I actually came from a franchise world background where I was working within the franchise world within property for one of the OGs of franchising in the UK. But when I went self-employed, I took all that knowledge with me, obviously. And when you learn about franchising, which is structured format businesses, there's a lot of systems in that. There's a lot of frameworks in that. There's a lot of reasons why things work and don't work, right? So I kind of already had this already inbuilt for me going, there's models here, you know. And then I was already doing digital marketing. So I was already doing digital marketing. I run an agency. I have done since 2010. And I have kind of narrowed my focus now into more of the work that gets done almost before you start putting that marketing strategy together, and that is the brand strategy stuff. And I thought, you know what, actually I really love this element. How do I marry the two things together?
You know, you mentioned an unconventional route to social media and all of that. I'm not sure that anyone who's over 30
Has a
has a
conventional one.
conventional route. I mean, it didn't exist when I
No.
graduated from school, you know.
No.
But it's interesting that it came from franchising, because franchising, I'm sure a lot of those systems specifically are about protecting the brand. I've actually interviewed a couple people
Yes.
about, you know, entrusting their brand to others. You know, Mel Bridger, who has her fitness franchises,
Yes.
and Amanda Gates, who has the House of Wise, you know, direct selling situation. Entrusting your brand to others really requires it to be buttoned up so that it's very clear. And one of the interesting things about this is that, like anything in marketing, or rather like most things in marketing, it is both art and science. And the thing I love
Yes.
most about your system, which you're going to get into in just a moment, is that it does not stifle creativity. It does not put limits on things. It's more guidelines, it's more guardrails. And that can actually allow you to be more creative in a lot of ways because you're aware of the sandbox you're playing in. So before you even get into the system, I'd love it if you could kind of introduce us to how it does provide that nice mix of sort of limits but also freedom.
Yeah, and I have to say, I saw, you know, Drew Davis, who's an amazing keynote speaker,
He is
and
such
he,
a good speaker. I'm reading his book,
oh,
the referable speaker, which was specifically
yes,
referred to me by several friends who are in it. I opened it up and there's Andrew and Pete, there's Anna Handley. I was like,
all
yes,
the good
this is
guys.
my book.
Yeah.
This is my book because they're not robots. All right, sorry, fangirl moment here. Continue on about Drew Davis. Go ahead.
We could have our own little fan group just for Drew Davis. I just want to like hug him a lot and put him in my pocket.
Absolutely.
Not in a weird way. Um, yeah, so now what Drew said, and it was for an Andrew and Pete event that he did. And what I really loved that he said is actually, and it was like an aha moment for me, was like, actually, damn it, you're right, because he'd phrased it just right. He said creativity comes from constraints. And I was like, oh my goodness, you are so right. And I had felt that within an agency where I work with, I think I have 5 or 6 set freelancers that I've worked with nonstop for the last 6 years of those 12 that I've been running my agency. And I know that if you don't have a good brief, your graphic designer or your guys that are creative actually can't be creative, because I think the fallacy or the myth around creativity is like, just come up with something, just come up with an idea. It's impossible to do that unless you're completely magical and wizardry, right? Any creative actually needs what you nicely put there. They need guardrails. And by giving guardrails, actually what you're doing is making their brains kind of push out the juice, if you like, where they actually do need to be more creative, to think outside the box, because they're only given a box in which to play, or a sandpit, like you've said, right? So this is the element of just remembering, and I try and explain this to my clients as well, when, because I'm a big proponent of templating and automating, not automating from a machine perspective, but building a machine around you that really helps you leverage your time. And that means you don't give up your creativity. What you are being is much more efficient. So when you're using systems thinking within your brand strategy, what you're actually doing is going, okay, there's a nice framework, a safety net, if you like, of which can go, which is really showing you which parts are actually really important, which parts you need to make micro decisions about. However, how you flex and play with that within those parts, you know, which is the kind of work that you and I do with clients, that will vary client to client. So what you're not changing is the stuff that you were saying about being personable or being resonant with an audience or making things unique. You still do that, but what systems or frameworks or models give you is those guardrails to go, look, all right, Shelley, you think you got a great idea, that's fantastic. But if you want to do something great in that area, do it within the structure, but you can do whatever you like within that structure. Does that help?
It absolutely does. And really, like any sort of automation or any sort of thing that helps us with efficiency, you get out what you put in. So if what you put in is uncreative and dull, then yes, what you get out will be samey. If what you put in is, new and creative, this is just going to make it so much easier to put that creativity out there in a way that's actually going to get across and frees your mind up for other things instead of tackling everything, like reinventing the wheel every time.
Exactly.
That's not good for creativity at all.
No.
But you still can innovate. And we'll get to that kind of at the end, I think, how this does have flexibility. But let's get into the meat of today's discussion. Let's get into your system, your process. So now, does it start out big picture and get narrower, or does it start with the building blocks and then build a big picture? Guide us through it a little bit.
All right, so it's always good to start big picture first. At least that's what I lean into quite a bit. It is what I'm more proposed to. But I feel like if you don't know where it is that you're going to or what you're trying to achieve, there's no way of defining and deciding what it is that you're going to be doing today or in the lead up to that future. So we always start with the brand purpose bit first. And sometimes this is very, very hard for people, especially small businesses or micro businesses or 1 or 2 person businesses, to actually just kind of think really clearly and take that time to, almost like Michael Hyatt calls it, casting that vision. Because actually, and I'm biggest proponent about this, is your picture of that future needs to also include what your ideal working life is. So not balance and work-life balance, because I don't feel like it ever balances as a mom and a business owner. I'm sure you feel the same. But ultimately, what you want is that perfect working or ideal working life. And why I say that is because that's then going to help you define your business model. And when you get into your proposition and what your services are and how you deliver, always start with the brand purpose, because that's going to give you direction.
And I love what you said about how you have to think about what your, emphasis on your, ideal,
working
mix
life
looks like. Because the fact is, in addition to the fact that, you are a human, and I appreciate so much business systems that account for humanity as a key component. But also, one thing that I know I always say about branding is, if you make it too hard for yourself, if you make it something artificial and outside of yourself, if you don't consider the human at the center of it first, it's going to become a super exhausting thing to maintain. And you want your brand to be something that flows a bit more organically from you and that you can keep up, because consistency is so key. And if you do something, if you structure something because it looks good on paper, or you structure something because you think it will sell, and you forget the person who has to actually do all of these things, that's the key to inconsistency and towards coming up with this great, beautiful plan that you then can't execute on. So I love that it starts with picturing your ideal work life instead of being like, well, obviously you just want to hustle to the top. No. Oh, beautiful. Continue.
Is it obvious? I don't know. I think that. So. Maybe we're too old. I don't know. Wise. I'd like to say wise, not old. So, okay, should we move into the subsystems then? So I feel...
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
So once you so you've got your picture of what you want your ideal work life to look like, and you know what your goal is, what your aim is there. So what happens next?
Yeah. So the next thing is there's 3. So the bigger system is obviously your business, right? So this is kind of the big system we're talking about, and now we've just talked about the fact that it's we've ticked the box of the purpose and your direction. Then for me, how I see the systems-led thinking with brand strategy is that there's 3 kind of subsystems sitting within that when we're talking about brand strategy. And those are your personality, your positioning, and your presence. Now, why I call them subsystems is because each little system themselves each has a little purpose as well. So remember what Donella Meadows said, there always needs to be a purpose, and then obviously the elements, interrelationships, and the inflows and outflows. So those three subsystems are what you would then focus on. So they're your little mini frameworks within your brand strategy, because all of that needs to then all work together towards the bigger purpose of the business. Should we get into each one, Christine?
Let's do it. Absolutely.
All right, so should we start with brand personality, because that's the coolest one to kind
I
of
also
move on
love
from.
that it's moving, it's all coming outward from the inner self. This is beautiful.
Yes.
This is how I love to brand too. So this makes me very happy
Yes.
that the system is built around that. All right, brand personality.
Perfect. All right. So now brand personality, for me, within brand personality, the different elements within brand personality is one, you do work out literally what your brand personality is. So you find that archetype or that character, who it is that you're embodying as a business, or if you're a personal brand, is that you as a personal brand, or what's interchangeable and whatever works for you. And then the third element are personality traits. So those kind of elements that are sitting within that little system all work together as a little system in order to almost manifest that brand personality. Now, part of the work we do in the brand purpose bit is look at your origin story. And when you're looking at your origin story to kind of pull out how you came to where you are today, sometimes that's painful for people. Sometimes it can be traumatic. Sometimes it can be good. Sometimes it can be bad. Everybody's different. But by doing that origin story exercise, what you manage to pull out is what you'll end up needing later on in the process around actually, who are you? Like, are you the fun kind of party person, or, what are the things about your personality that you want to come through? You almost kind of get to know yourself again. So does that make sense?
It does, and I'd love to hear a little bit more about what sort of things you go into, because I know one big hurdle is that a lot of people, when they go into a personal branding situation, they're thinking about where they want to be, they're thinking about how they want to come across, and especially if they've pivoted. Especially if they had a background in one thing, and now part of the personal branding work they're doing is presenting themselves as something, fairly new and different. I think it's so important that they're going backwards into where they've been to really get a sense of where they're going. Can you dig into that just a little bit more? Maybe some stuff that you've seen people either get tripped up by, or that appears to be especially an amazing revelation that helps them?
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think the element of going back, and why I start with the origin story, though everybody that I work with really does struggle with this exercise, is because by doing that, keep going back, what you are just revisiting is also your core values, the things that are kind of become more and more important to you as life has gone on. Sometimes if you can revisit that, every 5 to 10 years, you'll notice that almost like the quotient value of how, in terms of priority for some values, may have shifted. And like you say, by also noticing that, that's probably what started to drive why they need to pivot, or why they need to change, or do something new, or do something different, right? So I think that bit's quite important, the values in that, but also the unique elements. I think the unique points, people forget why they're unique. So just think, especially people in marketing, the industry is just so flooded. So you kind of like, well, and I try and say this for a lot of clients as well, but a lot of us are in flooded markets now where there's just so many people. So actually you can only be unique by being you. But in order to know what those unique points look like, you still need to go back and go, actually, like I was saying to you, I came to social media from a completely different, from a completely different angle. I came to brand strategy not through graphic design. I came to brand strategy through another route. You will have done things in your past lives and your past working experience that have given you kind of different kinds of stretching skills and things that maybe another professional in the industry doesn't have. And like you say, if they do get to a point that they end up pivoting, it's really useful to look back, don't you think, on like how you've gotten there, because then actually you can go, actually, that flag said to me about 10 years that this pivot was coming. Have you noticed that?
Absolutely, I have. And it plays to the whole thing of, other people do what you do, but no one else has your journey. And you can find yourself picking up things from that journey, years on. I'm kind of changing my focus a little bit this year in 2023 with who I work with. And I'm
Yeah.
looking back and I'm like, oh, my experience from my 20s in a completely different career
Yeah.
path is actually coming into play now. I'm like, no, I can put that in my bio now. And I've been
Yes.
kind of, leaving it behind, but you pull out different skills from different times. Oh, I love this so much.
That's
Okay.
brilliant.
So
We go on to the
brand,
next one.
sure, brand
Yeah.
personality, going back, looking at your journey, seeing where you are now and where you want to go in the context of where you've been before and what you're bringing to it, the well-rounded human you're bringing to this
it.
brand personality.
What I
All right.
will add here is that little element of the framework of using the
Yeah.
brand archetype framework, because while people, I know people have done lots of personality tests and things like that. It's very similar kind of thing that you do when you do. It's the Pearson Marks brand archetype framework that I use in my work. But I don't know if you found this, Christine, by actually having those archetypes and getting people to kind of do that exercise, what it did end up doing, and I had one person do this within my program and actually said, oh my gosh, finally you made it okay for me. By doing that, it kind of gave them evidence to go, actually, it's okay for me to be me or to be the way I am in terms of my brand personality or my own personality, or how I actually approach things with their clients. Because in their archetype work, we work on the top active archetypes that come out strongest for you. And then I get them to kind of dig into the traits, because not all of the traits will be true, only some. And then we just pull out what's relevant. And then they go, oh, so when ruler came up for me as my third highest one, I was like, oh, I don't like the sound of that. It sounds like I'm a dictator. But actually, when I looked into it, it was very true for me in that, I like to see an order to things, or a hierarchy to organize societies even. And if I can quite easily be a leader, but I'm more than happy for someone else to lead if I feel like they're doing a good job.
You empower. That's what you do.
Yeah. But just making sure that actually there are these frameworks even within the little systems. And again, that's not stopping your creativity, is it? It's actually going, actually, that's true. I can use that,
You're uncovering all sorts of things that you can use. Okay, so of
right.
course, I love the
All right,
personality part, but I want to make sure we get to the rest of it.
Yeah.
So on to the next.
Okay, so the next subsystem, remember there's 3 we were going to talk about. So this one is the positioning. So this is where you actually get deep into your proposition work. So this is like my biggest sandpit, right? This is the bit I enjoy most because I've brought that from my franchising days, right? So your positioning, the elements that go on within your positioning is, 1, you work out really truthfully what your value proposition is. And that basically means, who you are, what you do, and who you do it for. We pull out your brand principles, and then we also work on your value ladder and your proprietary method. So they're the kind of elements within that system. Do you want to dig into that?
Yes, I do. I want to dig into exactly what they mean. How you find out these things. How do you, because one of the things you said earlier that certainly comes up all the time with clients is people don't realize what makes them special or unique.
No.
People don't realize their points of difference because they're living them. They're not different to them. Fish don't know they're wet. So how do you help people figure out? Yeah. So how do you help people, sort of figure those things out? What is their positioning? How do they narrow down on that and not try to be all things to all people and thus nothing to anyone?
Yeah, and that's the bit I try and explain to them again. And I see it every time at networking, no matter what group you go to, there'll always be one person that goes, I do this for everyone and everything. And we're like, oh, I'm completely grey. I have no idea who I need to look out for you at all. So we kind of visit that when we're doing it. And again, because this is why we start with the origin story and the purpose, is it's dropped the seeds already for this work that you end up doing. So you will have already have had to think about, actually, what does make me unique? What makes me different? Bring that work to the fore. I do a bit of a market context exercise for people. So it's pretty simple. People will probably be doing off the top of their head, but I've structured it so that actually they're asking the right questions. So who else is doing what you're doing? And why do you feel like they don't do a great job of it? Or who else is doing what you're doing and you actually really admire what they do? So what are the good things about what they're doing that you maybe want to build into what you're doing? just so they kind of know where they are in their marketplace. And I like to use visuals, Christina. I'm very visual. So I do a lot of like, I'll have a grid and go, okay, you know, where would you sit on the grid? And sometimes just by having conversations, but actually visually seeing it in front of them, going, oh, I see now. I'm trying to be this, but actually everything I'm saying and doing is actually positioning me in a completely different way. So I can see now why the audience doesn't get me and I can't find my ideal clients. So there's a little bit of that we do within the value proposition work. Is that enough for the value proposition? I can go into
That's fantastic. That is good. But I know that we also before we wrap up, I know we also have to get to the other P.
Yeah, we can do that.
So I want to make sure that we get to that other P. We want to make sure that that P has some presence in this discussion.
Let's do that. So the brand presence bit is the bit that actually is the sexy bit that everybody notices the most, right? So it's the bit where people are experiencing you as a brand. That's what you say, it's your behavior. So it's all of those things that actually we as consumers of brands, that's our experience of brands. So within that, we work on and I know you like this, the brand experience matrix, our experience map. And we literally work out a visual styling guide and an editorial styling guide. So I've kind of developed almost like an illustrated guide to you that includes all of this stuff. So it's almost like brand guidelines, but on steroids.
Love it. So we've talked about your P's, and thank you for being a presence on we've talked about the P's, and thank you for being a presence on the show. Got a bit ahead of myself. What are your P's, Shelley Röstlund? What is your purpose, personality, positioning, and presence for your own Shelley Röstlund brand?
Shouldn't prepare me for this one. For me, brand purpose is very much linked into my personal why, which is just, be good to people, do good and be good to people. So for me, I find like my vision and my purpose of my business is to just really help subject matter experts who I see every single day starting up little businesses and consultancies and then failing in a couple of years. And a part of that is because they can't actually articulate their value. And I just want to help people do that. I think that's kind of what I'm here for. And that's what I'd really love to do. And I'm sure I have a much better articulated purpose somewhere that I could share. My personality is very much that magician and that creator, because I use a lot of bright colors in my branding just to kind of stand out a bit in the newsfeed. The colors make me happier as well. So my personality is very much about trying to be as approachable and knowledgeable and as friendly as possible from a personality perspective. I don't necessarily have a caricature. The entertainer is not really part of me. So that's kind of probably encapsulates my personality. My positioning, in terms of positioning, very much from, that depends if you're looking at price positioning or not, but basically, where I'm sitting at the moment in my marketplace is being that kind of online entrepreneur as well. So I have that group program as well, but my positioning is, not a commodity. I'm not a commodity based kind of service. Everything for me is very specific to a client, but a particular client, and that's a subject matter expert running micro businesses, because I'm really trying to get entrepreneurs to understand freelancers better and freelancers in a better position to support those entrepreneurs better. And that's a lot of the work that I do. Presence for me, because I am a service-based business, presence for me is very much about my everyday approach with my clients. I do have a styling guide. I do have all of the things that I should be working on anyway, just because it makes my life a lot easier as well. That is very quick. I could have prepared something better for that.
Sorry about that. I like keeping it kind of on the fly. I don't want it too pre-packaged. But it's okay because you're familiar with your system. You've gone through your system, and so you had the answers. It doesn't have to be perfectly composed and packaged in order for you to still have had that framework and those guidelines in order to know the answers. And that's really the best value of the system. You know the answers.
Yes, and you can, like you say, when you are out and about, you already know your go-to in what your answers are. Hopefully I had the answers today.
There you go. These aren't, hardball gotcha questions. I make sure that I make my guests look nice and smart because they are subject matter experts like yourself. All right. So if someone out there listening is a subject matter expert and they want to find out more about you, where can they find you? Why should they find you? And what will they find there?
Okay, so probably the best told all is I launched my personal branded site. So that's there for you, shelleyröstlund.com. I'm sure it'll be in the show notes and you can spell it right. And on there, you'll find my podcast as well. It's pretty much a companion piece for my group program. As a subject matter expert, why I work well with knowledge workers is basically what you are, is because it's so hard having an intangible marketable value. And I just really love helping people to identify that value and really helping them to put that in terminology and visuals and articulating it in a way that their audience can resonate with, and also getting them to really understand the problems they're solving. Because I think as knowledge experts or subject matter experts, you're in your head so much. So I really like to kind of pull those things out of their heads and then just show them actually in the mirror how great they are. So that's why you should get in contact and just have a look at the website. And I use Instagram and LinkedIn quite a bit. So I'm on both of those platforms, but the links are all there for you as well.
Love that so much. Thank you so much, Shelley, for being here today. You know that as soon as we cut, I'm going to be going through that whole framework myself. Because no matter how long you've had a brand, it's always a good idea to kind of take another look, refresh, see if maybe you've grown in directions that you didn't even realize you had. So this is a really good idea, not just if you're starting a brand, but also if you're refining it, and anyone who really wants to up their game and get better.
Definitely. Yeah. I would agree with that, especially every couple of years. And when you want to pivot or change. So definitely revisit.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much, Shelley, for being here. It's been a great conversation. Thanks for your time.
Thank you so much, Christine.
And thank you so much for being here. Also, whether you're listening to this on your podcast player of choice via the Adweek Podcast Network, or if you're watching the video podcast on YouTube, either way, be sure to subscribe because I have new expert interviews dropping every single Monday for the podcast. Same interview dropping every single Friday on YouTube for the video. And in between, on Tuesdays, I have the Chat About Brand chat on Twitter, where you get to weigh in on the week's topic. See you next week. Bye. Thanks for listening to Let's Talk About Brand, part of the Adweek Podcast Network and Acast Creator Network. This podcast was produced by Christine Gritman, executive produced by Al Manarino and John Heil, and edited by Christine Gritman. You can listen and subscribe to all of Adweek's podcasts by visiting adweek.com/podcasts. Stay updated on all things Adweek Podcast Network by following us on Twitter @Adweek Podcasts. And if you have a question or suggestion for the show, send us an email at podcast@adweek.com.